Hello, welcome to the Basketball Soapbox. I'm your host, Daniel Daly, here as we get into a new episode in a new session I want to call Soapbox Summers, where I go into a lot of the stuff that is not during the regular season, our regular, normal following of the NBA season, and my thoughts about that. Soapbox Summer is kind of where I get into my toolbox a little bit and just talk about other things in the NBA, other series out there that have passed on, and other videos that I can react to and give my thoughts about, and especially the biggest thing that I want to look at is just different eras, especially from when I was growing up. I want to look into a series that Bomani Jones did right before the pandemic called Bulldoze, where he goes over Michael Jordan's opponents during the 90s and various teams and gives his thoughts on that and looks at the history of these teams that a lot of people might not know about or not have not researched or look into. So that's where I want to start today. I kind of want to start here and go through this kind of series and then go through kind of how I got into basketball with Orlando and Boston and Shaq, especially when I was younger, and my brother with NBA Jam and all the other stuff that can kind of just come into here. So this is trying to be a fun series, do something a little bit different, and start it off right. But we're going to start off with Bomani Jones Bulldozed Series here. And this first edition here is where he goes over the New York Knicks, the stalwarts of the 90s. When you think about 90s basketball, you think about rough, tough, rugged, and it starts here. There's a couple other references that I want to look at. Chris Herring's book, Blood in the Garden. If you're a Knicks fan, I suggest you look into that, and I recommend that book because it's definitely awesome, especially on audiobook. That's how I listen to it. It was really awesome to just get that just an in-depth look into the Knicks at that point in time. And I want to give my thoughts on the Knicks because I feel like there's a lot of things that people don't talk about, even though people praise the Knicks during that time. And I want to get into some situations where I'm not going to praise them. So we're going to help with that, especially this series by Bomani Jones is going to help here. And we're going to get into it here, starting off with the New York Knicks in this series. This is going to be a fun one, so let's enjoy it. Let's see what happens.
The 1990s were Michael Jordan's decade in the NBA.
Most definitely.
While he was winning 6 titles with the Bulls, 29 other organizations missed out on championship glory.
Woo.
These are the stories of some of the teams that were relegated to footnotes on MJ's path to the top. Today, the New York Knicks. They're kind of like the Bad Boys Pistons, if the Pistons didn't care at all about scoring points.
Facts.
They owned the second best winning percentage in the East throughout the 90s. And a team that was about 20 years removed from its previous last title back then, it's about another 25 years removed from that title now. Of course, we start with Patrick Ewing. Ewing entered the league in 1985 as the surest thing anyone could remember. So accomplished as a college player and dominant as a defensive center that Bill Russell comparisons seemed fair. If you look at Ewing's numbers and the Knicks' improvement while he was there, don't try to compare Ewing to anybody else when you do that. It's clear. The man delivered. Over the years, the Knicks added pieces.
I just want to stop right there for a moment there and just bring up Patrick Ewing here at that point in time, especially coming into the league, especially for the New York Knicks there. If you want to check more about that in his college bringing, I suggest checking out ESPN's 30 for 30, Requiem of the Big East. It really gets into John Thompson and Patrick Ewing during that time and really just goes over the career of all that stuff, and especially the Big East, which is not the same as it was back in the day, but the start of ESPN, bringing up college basketball at that time during the East, was very valuable, and the Georgetown Hoyas were a part of that, especially with John Thompson and Patrick Ewing, so I suggest checking that out. Patrick Ewing, up until he faced the Bulls legitimately, where they really had a shot, 53% shooting from the field, 29.6 points per game, 9.6 rebounds, and 3.1 blocks. He played with Bill Cartwright during that time earlier on, so they were kind of just platooning that a little bit there, especially with the injuries to him and Bernard King. He played with Bernard King. Imagine if Bernard King was healthy for the Knicks. Wow, that would have been crazy. But just looking at Patrick Ewing's output there, especially defending the rim, he was one of the best in the NBA, and I believe in 1990, I think he went averaged 28 points a game. So he can get the ball in the basket there, and people kind of forget about the young Ewing if you didn't see him or watched older games like that. Ewing was the real deal for the New York Knicks for a very, 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 very long time. But let's get into the cast of the Knicks there, other than Patrick Ewing there, of course, with these guys here, Charles Oakley, John Starks, and Anthony Mason, where Bomani Jones will pick up with that.
Surrounded. None were stars, but that was the charm of this unit. In 1988, the Knicks acquired Charles Oakley from the Bulls for Bill Cartwright. Jordan hated that trade because Oakley was one of his best friends, though Scottie Pippen probably liked it because Oakley once slapped him in the face on camera because Scottie was a rookie and Oak was Oak.
See that in The Last Dance.
In 1990, John Starks signed with the Knicks after an unnoteworthy year with the Warriors, followed by a year in the long-gone Continental Basketball Association. After the 1991 season, the Knicks signed Anthony Mason, a former college point guard turned power forward who played 24 games in the previous 2 seasons for the Pistons and Nuggets. All 3 would become New York basketball legends.
All right, let's start there. I'm going to stop there for a minute and just talk about these guys individually. Of course, Charles Oakley was a rugged, tough guy in the NBA. Kind of been an enforcer there when you look at his career and stuff like that, especially with the Bulls and the Knicks especially. And thinks that if he shot as many shots as Karl Malone, he'll be an all-star too. I don't think so, Oak. I don't think you had that part in your game. I don't think so. But he had a long career, was a part of playoff teams with Chicago, the New York Knicks, and the Toronto Raptors with early Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady before Tracy left, I believe. So he's been valuable and been a good role player for a bunch of teams there and had a long career in the NBA. Moving on to John Starks, my earliest recollection of John Starks, of course, battles with Reggie Miller and stuff like that, and trying to guard Jordan and stuff like that, especially in 94, 95 when I really started watching basketball with my family a lot. I just remember on NBA Jam how he was yellow. random ass shit, right? Like, I remember on NBA Jam, everybody was either black or white, and he just was all yellow, so we just called him Yellow Man for all that. Even on the video games when I was little like that. But John Starks, a tough guy that came from the bottom, graveling out of all those situations there, how he got to the NBA, going to the minor leagues and stuff like that, and finally getting on the roster there and be able to find a spot with the New York Knicks, and had a long career as well. Anthony Mason, a very good player in the NBA, solid. I just always remember the one-hand free throw. That was the thing. That's what I always remembered from Anthony Mason as a young kid. So he had a long career as well, and I remember him on the Hornets as well. But those guys were stalwarts for the New York Knicks at that point in time. A lot of guys that got it out the mud. That's one thing about the New York Knicks. They got it out the mud, especially with their role players and stuff like that. And that's the one thing I want to talk about, especially during this series, is that how Patrick Ewing really didn't have another All-Star next to him. Yes, John Starks made it in, I believe, 94. He made the All-Star game. But he really did not have a lot of help around him in order to take that next step, where I feel like a lot of other teams had that. But kudos to Patrick Ewing for always trying to be the leader for that team. But let's continue here as Bomani gets into who is the head of the table right there, the coach of the New York Knicks.
While Jordan was winning his first title, Pat Riley wasn't even in the NBA. After 9 years of working with one prodigy, Magic Johnson, Riley spent the 1990-91 season working with another, Bob Costas at NBC. But May 31st, 1991, Riley signed a 5-year contract worth $1.5 million a year, the richest coaching contract in the NBA at the time, to replace John McLeod as head coach of the Knicks. Most fans remember Riley's Showtime Lakers for their dazzling up-and-down style, but the world didn't see his grueling practices and demanding approach that eventually burned out his players in Los Angeles.
That's a big factor.
But in New York, the toughness was on full display. The toughness was the hallmark. It was what made them the Knicks. If you don't believe it, over his 4-year tenure as Knicks head coach, the team led the entire NBA in personal fouls.
What's there to say about Pat Riley, man? He's the dawn right there. You've seen him with the Showtime Lakers for nearly a decade, getting to 8 NBA Finals, I believe. Going to the Knicks, reaching 1 NBA Finals, and then going to the Heat. Later in the career, where that's a big feud, where you can hear about his introductions into the NBA, especially with the Knicks there, that portion there, how he came into the league, to the Knicks, all the demands he had, all the impact that he had. You can check that out in Blood in the Garden. Of course, I'm going to recommend that tremendously. It's an awesome book. Check it out, please, because it just gives a lot of detail and information about the New York Knicks, how the Pat Riley thing came about, how Pat Ewing was there. He actually stopped Patrick Ewing from requesting a trade when he was hired. There was so much turmoil with the Knicks regarding drugs and just the organization. The New York Knicks are not the prestige organization that we think of it as today, especially with all the losing, how they stand in demand and stuff like that, a big market like that. There were a lot of problems that I think the book explains and checks out there. Before Pat Riley was there, Patrick Ewing wanted a trade there, and when Pat Riley was hired, he went to Pat and said, "Hey, I want a trade." Gave him a paper, literally gave him a paper with the teams on it. At the top, it was the Blazers and the Warriors, and especially getting on the West Coast and stuff like that. And Pat Riley convinced them to stay, and that's the power of Pat Riley, who had the Showtime Lakers before that and tried to just basically tell Patrick Ewing, imagine a parade going down Main Street in Times Square and the New York Knicks on the parade and the float. Like, he's like, that's why I came here. I think you can bring that here. And he convinced Patrick Ewing to stay. That's the power of Pat Riley, and he gave them guys a shot, a legitimate shot, which we'll get into continuing on here.
The Knicks window didn't truly open until 1992. The only two teams at a time had legitimate windows in the East of the 1980s and early 90s. First was the Sixers and Celtics, then Celtics and Pistons, then Pistons and Bulls, all of whom won a title in that stretch. But after Jordan and company dispatched the Bad Boys in 1991, the next true contender played at Madison Square Garden. And until Riley left New York in 1995, winning the East meant you might want to beat the Knicks. In Riley's first season coaching the Knicks, they finished second in the NBA in defensive rating before leading the league the next three seasons. From 92 to 95, the Knicks won 50 games each season, including seasons of 57 and 60 wins. Only once prior had the Knicks won 57 games, and only once prior had they won 60 games. In both of those seasons, they won championships. The Knicks were
I want to talk about the parity situation that I have at the bottom of the screen there. The Lakers made the finals 8 times during the 80s there, and the Rockets made it twice. So in the Western Conference there, where you have multiple teams there, I think Dallas made the Western Conference Finals, and I think Phoenix made the Western Conference Finals. I wasn't sure if that was 90 or the late 80s there, where they kind of cracked and got in one. But when you look at that Western Conference just at that time, how the Lakers were just dominant, how they were on stacked teams. And when you look at the East there, you got the Celtics making it 5 times, the Sixers making it 3 times, and the Pistons making it twice before the end of the end of the 80s. When people talk about parity, it was either the Lakers or the Celtics in the 80s. That's what it was going to be, regardless of what everybody thought, what everybody tried to put and paint a picture of the 80s and back in the day and how competitive it was. Let's just say that, like, those teams were stacked. Legitimately, especially when you think about Houston with Akeem Olajuwon and Ralph Sampson and all those guys there. Before they had Moses Malone as well, and then Moses Malone went to the Sixers and they got to the finals a couple times there. The Pistons there, you can watch the Bad Boy Pistons doctor. I think they said the GM made 45 trades before assembling a championship team. So that team was also stacked there. But when you think about the Celtics and Lakers during the 80s, it was either those two teams, and you had to go through those two teams to win it. But when people talk about parity and how they look at it today, I'm like, everyone got upset about the Warriors and Cavs making it. And it's just like, yeah, but there were some other teams in there battling, trying to get there. They just didn't get to the finals. So you can look at that any era of basketball and see that, especially with the 90s when Magic retired and the Bad Boy Pistons broke down, as well as the Boston Celtics, Larry Bird hurt his back, and they were hanging on to Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale there. The passing of Reggie Lewis and Len Bias as well definitely changed things drastically for the NBA. But looking at the 90s, you see all these other teams that made it, and it took years for them to make it. That's a lot. That's a thing that I want to point out in this series. It takes a lot to get to an NBA championship, especially in the 90s when you look at those teams there. And the New York Knicks especially was one of those teams. But I want to talk about passing the torch there. I don't think he touches on it on this series. It's the Bad Boy Pistons, because, of course, they beat the Bad Boy Pistons there. But it was passing of the torch in 1992 there. From the Pistons to the Knicks. Of course, the Pistons lost in 1991 to the Chicago Bulls in a sweep and walked off the court. And that was pretty much it for their reign there at the top of the Eastern Conference there. And the next year, they lost to the Knicks. And that was the mirror image of the Pistons at that time, where the New York Knicks taking that torch from them, beating them in the series 3-2. And that was the last of the Bad Boy Pistons there in 92. I think it's important to touch on that because people kind of gloss over that. But it was like, that was the end of the Pistons, man. And they really just passed the torch to the New York Knicks, who just carried that toughness and roughness. But we'll see about how I feel about that, how I always called them the poor man Bad Boy Pistons, which we'll get into.
Bunch of started from the bottom stories, even Ewing to some extent. Sure, he looked like a Hall of Fame center, but there weren't many great basketball players coming out of Jamaica at that time. Then there were Oakley and Mason, two undersized power forwards who attended historically black colleges who were perfectly relatable to
Check that
anyone
out.
who played pickup basketball. It was well overskilled with those two, making them heroes to a generation of guys who loved playing basketball in spite of not being that good at it. Nothing says what Pat Riley was going for quite like signing Anthony Mason and Xavier McDaniel, two 6'7" power forwards in the same offseason. I mean, just look at these dudes. Then there was John Starks, who was maybe 6'3", not particularly good at one particular thing, but man, he went hard. And that right there was the New York Knicks. You like guys who gave it everything they had, this was the team for you. But depending on how you liked basketball in 1992,
Four-man Pistons.
hated every single player on
Four-man
this
Pistons.
team. Say what you want about the Bad Boy Pistons, but they had excellent offensive players that were fun to watch. Z, Joe Dumars, Vinny the Microwave Johnson, only the greatest nickname in NBA history. But the Knicks, they came to beat the hell out of you. They even had guys who wanted to beat the hell out of you when they were on the injured list and seated on the bench wearing the most 1993 shirt of all time. Clyde Frazier might say Greg Anthony was thuggin' and Republican. In the Riley era, the Knicks were between mediocre and bad on offense and bottom 5 in the league in pace every season. The sludge of late 90s NBA offense, so bad the league has spent 20 years making sure that doesn't happen again, starts right here. When Pat Riley showed the world that a team could get itself one win away from beating Jordan's Bulls and one game away from winning a championship in 1994 on sheer physicality. Even if you appreciate it, you'd hate it if someone tried to make you watch it now. The dunk. It isn't the greatest dunk of all time. It might not even be the best baseline dunk at MSG during the 90s. Look at that one Jordan did.
Damn, Pat.
But it is John Starks with the Knicks up by 3, under a minute left, hoping to take a commanding 2-0 lead over the Bulls with the left hand off 2 legs over Horace Grant, with Jordan close enough to make the poster, and I seen it in my dorm freshman year, had it, and Jordan's right there in it. Not once since then have the Knicks felt so close to a title. Oh, and let's not forget Derek Harper and JoJo English fighting in David Stern's lap in Game 3 of the 1994 East Semis. Same game where Scotty sat out the final possession because they didn't call it a play for him.
That is right below the commissioner who is sitting in the 3rd row here.
Whew. What did Mike do to the Knicks? In the Riley era, including playoffs, the Bulls with Jordan were 28-11 against the Knicks. And it started before Riley got there as the Bulls bounced the Knicks from the playoffs in 91, and 92, and 93, and 96 for good measure. And it was all different kinds of misery. A sweep in 91, a grueling 7-game Bulls triumph in 92, and the disappointment of that 2-0 lead and losing 4 straight in 93. Particulars.
4 points.
Then Mike came back to nickel at MSG. Poor Patrick Ewing. He was on the business end of Jordan's game-winning shot in the 1982 NCAA championship game, then got eliminated by MJ 5 times in the playoffs in the 90s, more than any other Hall of Famer during that span. Well, Charles Smith. Here's Charles Smith, Game 5, 1993.
Smith stopped again by Pippen. What a play by Scottie Pippen.
Anyway, on October 6th,
I just want to touch base on that there with Charles Smith there. That's a little microcosm there, I believe, in 1996, was it? Or 90? No, that's 93 playoffs where he had that fumble with the ball there. And just talk about how Pat Riley despised Charles Smith to the point where Charles Smith was working out in the summer and he was running pickups with Magic Johnson and James Worthy, even after just after they retired. I think James stayed a little bit longer in the league. But once he told them that, hey, I'm going to New York, they were like, yo, man, you're done. Your career is over. They told him that he was done. Just because the physicality and sheer will that Pat Riley's practices were, his demand on his players, and all of that. And Charles Smith did in his eye and told him, yo, man, your career is over. And Pat Riley despised Charles Smith, despised him. They tried to keep Xavier McDaniels and lost him in free agency, actually to Boston. I think it was 2 years, $6 million at that time. And Pat Riley was sick. He was like, yo, we're losing Xavier McDaniels. What are we going to do? They eventually ended up getting Charles Smith. Charles Smith does not fit the fabric of a New York Knicks player. When you listen to, if you check out Blood in the Garden again, where they detail all this, it's basically again, chapter 6 there at the bottom there, he was a butterfly amongst the buffaloes, where those guys are rough and tough, rugged, and Charles Smith just didn't fit that makeup of the New York Knicks there. And to see that play out in the playoffs, it was like Pat Riley was right. Like, he questioned his toughness throughout the whole season, questioned his toughness while he was on the New York Knicks. And that one play showed every microcosm where Pat Riley was upset.
1993, Jordan stunned the world and announced his retirement. It was a sad day for the NBA, but the best news the Knicks ever heard.
Look at that.
The East was theirs. And in 93-94, the Knicks had the most wins in the East, finally conquered the Bulls, with a little help from Hugh Hollins, weathered a challenge from Reggie Miller and the Pacers, and made the NBA Finals to face the Rockets. After 5 games, the Knicks led 3-2, heading to Houston.
They were up 3-2, man.
The Knicks spent the second half of Game 6 chipping away at a 10-point halftime deficit, but despite John Stark's 27 points, lost 86-84.
Check that out.
3 days later in Game 7, let's just say Starks didn't score 27 points. Brick after brick after brick after brick. Starks went 2 for 18 from the floor. The Knicks lost Game 7, 90-84. And the way we talk about it, Kim Olajuwon, well, it ain't the way we talk about Patrick Ewing. By 95, there wasn't much left. Ewing didn't have enough left in his legs to make a finger roll in Game 7 to stave off elimination from the Pacers. Riley resigned via fax. That was that. The most 90s team of the 90s, with a Hall of Fame star, coached by a legend who won 8 titles as a player, coach, and executive at his other stops, couldn't get it done in New York on Michael Jordan's watch. Well, the Knicks couldn't do it any other time, but, you get the point.
And that's pretty much it, man. Just to look at the New York Knicks during that time. One of the biggest things is how I just thought how the New York Knicks just never got help for Patrick Ewing. You saw it there. They added Charles Smith. They added Charlie World and Chris Childs at the point in time. And the time when they finally got him some help, Patrick Ewing has battled through the 90s on bad knees and just wasn't the same when they got Latrell Sprewell and Allen Houston there added to that team. If they would have gotten those guys when he was younger, who knows? Maybe the New York Knicks pathway is completely different. But looking at this, and especially just doing a bunch of research on the New York Knicks and stuff like that at that time, it's like, yo, man, it was rough, it was tough, and they just, I don't know if Pat Riley's mystique and that toughness of the New York Knicks kept free agents and certain guys away. Maybe they heard about stuff from his time in LA where they kind of stayed away from that. But it's just like, damn, man, they really, really had a tough time during the 90s, even though they were one of the better teams. I think it was second. They were second in win percentage in the East during that time. And it's just like, yo, like, they can win games. They just didn't have the talent. And I think a lot of the times where that rugged, tough defense comes into play over the regular season, not every team's coming in to be like, battle that every night. You don't want to meet that physicality night to night. I'm pretty sure they don't. But you get into the playoffs and you kind of need that scoring edge where Pat kind of struggled a little bit. He didn't have the space and didn't have another creator on his team like that. And you just look at that part of the New York Knicks, it's like, damn, man, you guys really didn't get this guy legitimate help. Of course, he had some good players there. And when they came to the Knicks, it was just completely different. I think they tried to add Ronaldo Blackman at the end of his career, Derek Harper at the end of his career, a couple of guys there. And they had Mark Jackson and they traded him. They traded him after the 91 season, after the playoffs there, after they lost to the Bulls. And it's just like, man, you guys really didn't really put anything together to consistently do it basically off of will, right? Everything was just will over skill with those guys during the 90s. And it's just like, damn, man, they really couldn't get Patrick Ewing no help there. But if you want to learn more about the New York Knicks, of course, check out Blood in the Garden by Chris Herring. I definitely suggest everyone check that out. It's a good read, good listen if you want to check that out as well. Also check out Winning Time from Reggie Miller on the ESPN 30 for 30, where he goes over his time battling the Knicks and stuff like that, and just the battles that they had to go through to get that done. And look at that. But for this one, that will be it for this one. I just want to try this one out, do a little reaction video for the first edition of Soapbox Summer here, and try to get back into another one potentially soon. This one is the Cavs, how I got into basketball going forward. But continue to check this out. If you like this one, like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll get into it next time, man, where we probably cover the Cavs, or I'll talk about how I got into basketball. A lot of stuff going on here. We're still waiting on the day and trade. NBA Summer League has started. I'll probably get into that, talk a little bit about that this week as well, especially Jordan Walsh for the Boston Celtics. But Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, unfortunately got hurt in his first game, but we'll see if he's able to come back as well. Brandon Miller's off to a slow start, but I want to talk about those guys as well moving forward. But for this one, that'll be the end of the edition number 1 of Soapbox Summer. Hope you guys enjoy it. Like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll get into the next one here. Until next time, guys, thank you for joining me.